morning, all. Thanks for joining XConf. We're going to be talking about an interesting topic, serverless or Kubernetes for the microservices deployment. Let's cover the basic first before we deep dive into the trade-off between the both. Along with me, I'm going to be pairing with Sridevi. So let's introduce ourselves. My name is Ashish Bhalgat. I have around 15 years of industry experience. I'm playing a cloud solution architect role at ThoughtWorks India, Pune. Passionate about serverless, building distributed systems and the cloud native applications. Over to you, Sridevi.
Hi, I'm Sridevi. I'm a quality analyst with 15 years of experience in building test automation frameworks and continuous delivery. I am passionate about DevOps too. I'm a certified Kubernetes administrator and AWS certified developer.
Thanks. Let's move on to the next.
Thanks, Ashish.
Yeah, so we're gonna have a lot of things to cover here. Let's get started with. So we're gonna have rise of serverless. Then we're gonna be talking about serverless stack, serverless use cases, the popular use cases. We're gonna look at the demo on the elasticity piece of the serverless. Then Sridevi, we're gonna walk through us with trade-off between Kubernetes versus serverless in terms of microservices deployment. It will be followed up with serverless challenges and key takeaways. A lot of things to cover. Let's get started. Evolution of deployment. We'll talk about how the application deployment has evolved over the last 2 decades. Traditionally and even today, we deploy a lot of applications on enterprise data centers, or you can also call it as a private cloud, due to multiple reasons, because of compliance, security, resistance to move to cloud, or due to heavy investment on the servers. There are definitely a lot of challenges with this kind of deployments, like scaling, high availability, the cost. You need a dedicated IT staff to manage this deployment. Then what has been seen is it has been traditionally shift to virtual machine kind of deployment. It's also called an infrastructure as a service. We don't want to maintain the server ourselves, and then this was the major paradigm shift from the traditional deployment. This was the first step to move to cloud, and we have seen a lot of lift and shift applications getting deployed over the past years. Organizations will reserve the VMs on the cloud provider and they'll deploy their applications. And this is great. And then we move to containers kind of deployment. Docker and Kubernetes have revolutionized the deployment model for the last 5 years. They have improved the performance, scaling, portability, and time to deployment compared to the previous deployment model what we have seen. Then there's followed up with the serverless deployment. With Docker gaining a lot of momentum, there was complex tooling built for scheduling the containers, such as Docker Swarm, Rancher, Kubernetes, and this required dedicated infra ops team to manage those clusters. And hence the need arises to simplify the operational management and focus on business logic. Serverless is gaining a lot of momentum in the last 3 years, and it ensures developer focus on business logic, and operation is pretty much taken care by the ops team. The talk gonna be focusing on container orchestration and serverless, and you're gonna see in detail both of them. Container orchestration. Container provides great packaging abstraction, developer pack application code and dependent libraries all together. It has improved the portability, and we can move the application from developer fingers to the higher environment seamlessly. Again, container leverages this host OS, and you can spin multiple containers on the same server. As containers are tiny objects compared to VM based deployment, it can scale much better with improved performance. Container deployment provides universal way to deploy legacy app as well as the modern apps. As said earlier, with a lot of scheduling algorithms built around containers, things started getting complex, and you need to worry about provisioning, scaling, monitoring, state, security, deployment, and a lot more things. And there are tools available. There's one popular scheduling tool, which by now you guys would have guessed it, You're right. It's Kubernetes. It's an awesome tool, and we have been using this for deploying production application. But let me bring up an actual Kubernetes diagram from one of my previous project. Yeah, it looks scary. If you're a developer, you will only be worried about the pod, the highlighted piece, and rest of them is the infrastructure who takes care of it. And this has given birth to serverless. I mean, how can we be focused more from a developer friendly point of view? We're going to talk about serverless now. Yeah, it's a bad name, and there are definitely serverless for sure behind the scenes. Those are managed by the cloud providers. I think the better name could be server maintenance less, but yeah, it's not that catchy. Let's try to understand serverless with the famous car analogy. Let's assume you are attending the remote conference, XConf in this case, and you landed on the airport. You have two options. Either you go and rent a car or take Uber taxi to the conference destination. Now, if you choose the car rental option, it's pretty much similar to serverless full computing, where you need to choose the car, submit the papers, drive yourself to conference, pay for the entire day or two, and you need to refuel before returning the car. There's a lot of things you need to take care. Now, if you choose another option, while for the Uber, it's just point to point destination and it's much cheaper. You just need to pay for the distance you travel to the conference destination. You're not worried about what car it is, who's gonna be driving this, does it has enough fuel, is the car well maintained. It's totally abstracted out by the Uber for you, and that's exactly is the serverless mindset. The things are totally abstracted from the cloud provider, and you bring your application code and it just gets started. Let's look at the stuff. So IBM did the survey early 2021 with 400 enterprise users and CXO level. I would say what they have found is 68% agree they will likely develop the serverless application in the next 2 years. 31% is unsure. Probably this talk gonna help them. Another one, I think this is coming from Datadog. I think early 2021. Functions are invoked 3.5x times more than 2 years. This is only for Lambda. I'm sure you'll have some similar statistics for Azure and GCP cloud functions as well. Let's try to understand what is function as a service. We talked about serverless, and we're going to talk about what is FaaS. FaaS is kind of a subset of serverless stack. It's also called serverless compute. What happens behind the scenes is the servers are completely abstracted. As I said, you pack your applications and dependencies in zip file or a container image and hand it over to the cloud provider. They will instantiate the container and execute the functions on the cloud provider servers. It's totally event driven, and it will get triggered whenever any event arises, kind of HTTP event, queue event, a cron job event, or any kind of trigger. If there are a lot of events triggered same time, and the cloud provider has the responsibility to auto scale the servers and provide the great response time. It will scale down back when the load is normal. You pay only for the functions executed time, and that's it. That's the flexibility you get it. We'll talk about pay for warm instances. There's another way of paying model, I would say, for the latency sensitive applications. So you need to pay for minimum instances. And again, this is an ephemeral compute. So this is short-lived application. Your container gonna be there for a short duration. If there no more further request comes in, the container will be destroyed. All of this you get at an high availability, and that's nice reliability. Let's talk about serverless stack now. We talked about function as a service, FaaS. But yeah, there are more services provided by the cloud provider in this serverless stack. Cloud functions, or you could talk about function as a service, capture much of the mind share in serverless computing. But they are the one of many services in the serverless stack provided by the cloud provider. The excitement around FAS is very well justified because it's visible to developer community. But PaaS, backend as a service, comprises of a lot of set of services. One common trait what I've seen, we can fall any service into a serverless. There should be 4 principles. One of them is servers are hidden, so you don't see any server. The second is pay for use. You only pay when it's been getting used. You don't pay when it's idle. The high availability out of box and scale on demand. If these 4 principles, or I would say common trait, gets matched, I think you'll find a lot of services in the serverless stack, and each of the cloud providers working towards having their services in this fashion. We talk about storage. We have seen Azure Cosmos DB and DynamoDB popular choice. They offer serverless options. You only pay for read and write transaction, and that's it. You don't need to pay for how much data you store there, or setting up those database tables, I would say. We talked about eventing. Azure Event Grid is a popular choice here. You only pay for the events being generated. Orchestration is another great example. AWS Step heavily been used. It's used to orchestrate things. You only pay for the state transition and the state machine transition, and not the writing your orchestration logic stuff. ETL, Azure Data Factory, it's popular here. It's been used to move data from source to destination. You pay only for your ETL job getting executed, and it scales depending on the load. Analytics, ML service, SageMaker, they're getting charged only when you hit the machine model. At the end, I would say it's nice reliability at the rate of pay for use model. One thing to note here is the developers, architect should make use of all the services in the serverless stack all together. They should stitch it all together in the architecture. I mean, if you use Lambda and if you use PostgreSQL in your Kubernetes namespace, you want to run into a bottleneck there. So make sure you use the entire serverless stack from the beginning till the end. Let's talk about serverless popular use cases. I mean, there are many. It's not a perfect model for all the use cases, but great fit for many, and definitely needs to be evaluated during your architecture decisions. I had my first stint using serverless way back in 2017 for doing the health monitoring of the IoT platform we were building. The number of use cases has grown over time, and serverless use cases shines when you have unpredictable traffic. You have a lot of bigger connectivity from the cloud providers. Let's look at each of those different categories, and these are again few of those use cases what I found, but there are many use cases. HTTP trigger, very popular, building the microservices application, the mobile for backend, the RESTful APIs. Event bus, anytime you get a message on the PubSub topic or a queue, an event handler will get invoked and execute that particular function. Real-time data processing, I've heavily used this in IoT sensor data processing. You can do the massive stream processing at scale. Blob S3 trigger, as soon as any file gets dropped into S3 or blob, an event can get generated and you can do the transformation, auditing, or moving it to another data source. Cloud automation, there are a lot of cron jobs running in this fashion, and the email and SMS notification. More importantly, Netflix heavily use for their monitoring and alerting systems. They use Lambda. So yeah, that's another example. Analytics, I think this is getting very popular. Alexa, Google Home, speech to text. So they have an unpredictable traffic, and this is a perfect use case even for chatbots. So these are many, but there could be many more as well. The use cases where serverless does not shine, I would say, are long running batch processing, a map reduced job, and high compute intensive application, because you have an defined compute. I think it's probably those doesn't suit well here. And stateful applications. All of these applications what we built, they're recommended to be stateless. They are ephemeral, short lived. So stateful application doesn't suit well in the serverless world. Let's talk about cold start. If you have gone through serverless documentation or have worked with it, I'm sure you came across this word cold start. Let me try to explain you what exactly is this and how did cloud provider try to solve it. Yeah, so what you see here is lambdas are getting deployed into this cloud provider. An event is getting triggered. It could be an HTTP event or a queue-based event. What does the cloud provider now do is it instantiate the container. Not sure if it's a Docker or something else. Nobody knows except the cloud provider. And they have their event execute in this container. So what happens is, as soon as the container is instantiated, you download the source code, you initialize the libraries and the dependencies, and typically it takes some time. It's in few seconds to do these things, and before it executes that particular event, and that time is exactly called as a cold start. Yeah, the event gets executed once the initialize happens. Now any subsequent event coming will leverage the existing instantiated container, and this is called the warm start. So once the container is up and running, all the further requests, further events, I would say, will go through the same container, and you don't need to pay for that initial cold start. This is what it is. So you pay for the cold start during the download, code bootstrap, initializing the library, and then it's always the warm start. Everyone using serverless is unhappy as there's a cold start, which contribute the initial latency for the first request. I mean, you would have seen that. Though this problem is only for 2% in general, 2% of the total request, I would say. But yeah, cloud provider did came up with solutions for this as well. And it's pre-warmed instances. So basically what it means here is each of the cloud provider offers different ways to solve the cold start problem. Pretty much on the similar lines, but yeah, they term it different ways. AWS Lambda comes with throughput provision concurrency. Azure Function comes with premium function and app service plan. And GCP has minimum instances configuration set there. So it changes the analogy of pay for use model with pay for pre-warmed instances. Yeah, again, you need to do it in case if your application is latency sensitive. Those 2% of traffic hitting the cold start. If you are worried about that, go for this. You have an option, but you need to pay for it. Let's start on the serverless Elastic demo now. Let's see it, how it works. Let me switch to the remote desktop. Let me show the code. So what we're going to be seeing here is I've built an, I would say, a toy API kind of thing, which is going to create work items behind the scenes. So this is deployed in Azure Function. This is an Azure Function. It is having an HTTP trigger. So we're going to make an HTTP call from outside, and we're going to be creating these work items in Cosmos DB. So we have used the Cosmos DB, Azure Cosmos DB serverless offering to store all those work items there. So what I'm going to be showing here is, so we have this, all the things deployed in Azure portal. The function is deployed as a function app service plan, where we have a pre-warmed instance as 1, and it can scale to 10. So you can define the limit on how much it's going to scale. So it can scale up to 10 instances. And there's the Cosmos DB Right now in the work items, there are no items. I just deleted it, made it empty. This the insights on the Cosmos DB account. So there's not much usage for the last few minutes there. And more importantly, I would say is this is the function live metrics. You could see the function is deployed, it's running, and there are no requests getting hit. And I think there are 2 servers running right now because we have the pre-warmed instances. What exactly we're going to be doing is we're going to hit this HTTP endpoint with this loader tool, loader.io, to test the elasticity, I would say. So we're going to make 10,000 requests over the 1 minute time span, and we will see how serverless kind of scale up and scale down back. Yeah, so let's so I've used this loader test which basically gonna hit the endpoint 10,000 requests for a given minute time span, and we'll see how it runs. Just started this, so it's bombarding with 10,000 requests, and we could see the response getting succeeded. If you go back to function now, you could see earlier there were 2 servers. Now because the load has increased on particular CPU, the serverless, the cloud provider has kind of increased the number of servers to cater the request, and you could see within 1 minute the requests have evenly distributed across the servers, and they're going to scale down back once the number of requests goes down. So you could see it here, a lot of traffic, and you could also see on the Cosmos DB that there will be a lot of write operations happening here as well. Yeah, so basically you again pay for serverless only for the Cosmos DB. So whenever you do the write operations, you're gonna be paying for that itself. So you could see the spike over here. I believe the test would have finished by now. Yeah, we could hit the 10,000 records and there were no timeouts there. And yeah, it came back to 4 from 6, and slowly over the time, I think it will get back to 1. That's the preformed instance what we initialized with. That was the demo. Let's go back to the slides. I'll kind of hand it over to Sridevi now for covering the rest few topics.
So far, we have seen the concepts of serverless and how serverless handles autoscaling. Let us now look at how serverless compares with serverful architectures like Kubernetes in terms of microservices deployment. Taking a look at microservice deployment factors, microservices should be independently deployable and scalable, as the load on services can be different. Resource management should be possible at service level so that the underlying deployment platform can optimize scheduling. Service instances should be monitorable independently as well as part of a transaction. Deployment should be reliable. And since services can be written in different languages, there should be support for different language runtimes. These are the important factors for microservices deployments. In order to meet these needs, the ingredients of a deployment platform should be autoscaling, ability to scale based on metrics, resource management for efficient utilization of underlying infrastructure, robust ecosystem for observability, and deployment strategies to minimize downtime and risk. Let us look at how Kubernetes and serverless platforms achieve each of these features. Starting with resource management, in Kubernetes, resource requirements for a service are specified at a pod level in terms of CPU and memory required for the container. Kubernetes ensures that the resource requirements are met in addition to other scheduling rules like pod affinity and node affinity. In the case of serverless, memory required for a function is specified in deployment manifest. The memory of a function implicitly determines the CPU allocated for the function. Moving on to autoscaling, Kubernetes can scale services in 3 dimensions, either by increasing the number of pods, or by increasing the pod size, or by increasing the number of nodes in the cluster if the cluster is running out of resources. Autoscaling can happen on server metrics like CPU or memory, or based on custom metrics like number of requests per second per pod. For custom metrics, it leverages tools like Prometheus to collect custom metric data from pods. In the case of serverless, autoscaling happens as per the application request. To take example of Lambda, Lambda can autoscale exponentially for burst traffics up to burst limit, and after the burst limit, function instances scale linearly up to concurrency limits. These limits apply to all functions in a region, so care needs to be taken that maximum concurrent instances that an application needs fall below these limits. The concurrency limit encourages fine-grained functions with small execution times. Coming to Kubernetes observability, several tools work on top of Kubernetes clusters in the collection, aggregation, and visualization of logs, metrics, and traces. Some popular tools are Fluentd for log collection, Prometheus for metric collection, and Jaeger for distributed tracing. These tools must be installed as operators or daemon sets in Kubernetes clusters. Since logs and telemetry grow in large volumes over a period of time, storage servers must be provisioned and managed. In serverless functions, we need to measure metrics of functions with respect to serverless cost model and function limits. Because of the pay-as-you-go model of functions, it is important to track function invocation. Due to the concurrency limits, we need to watch for the concurrent execution to the number of concurrent executions and throttles. As functions have max time limit on execution, we need to keep tab on the duration of execution. These metrics are at function level. In microservice architectures, though, measuring end-to-end visibility of transactions is important. Cloud providers provide native tools for serverless observability. For example, in the case of AWS, CloudWatch collects logs and metrics at each serverless function level, while X-Ray tracks distributed tracing across functions and services in a transaction. Sometimes these tools may fall short of end-to-end visibility, which is addressed by services like Dashbird and Epsagon. These services provide aggregated numbers around cost and performance across business functions. For advanced use cases, we can also set up Prometheus exporters that collect metrics from CloudWatch. Coming to deployment strategies, Kubernetes supports rolling updates natively. For advanced deployment strategies like blue-green deployments and canary deployments, add-ons like Istio need to be used. In serverless, API gateway can ship traffic to 2 Lambda versions. Depending on the traffic weight, this method can be used for blue-green or canary deployments. The success of the new version deployment can be monitored using CloudWatch alarms. So we have seen how serverless and serverfull can handle the needs of microservices deployments. We have seen that some of the requirements of a deployment platform like autoscaling are provided out of the box in serverless. Now let us move on to how these two models compare in terms of cost. When it comes to cost savings, medium and low traffic applications gain considerable cost savings in serverless model. Also, applications with unpredictable traffic patterns will incur considerably less costs in the serverless model. In the two applications mentioned here, which fall in these categories, serverless dramatically reduced costs. But for high traffic applications with predictable load patterns, Kubernetes clusters may incur less costs to run applications. As cloud providers provide discounts for reserved instances, the cost of running the application can turn out to be cheaper in Kubernetes clusters. However, running applications on Kubernetes also incurs the operational costs of managing the cluster along with the support tooling for observability. Therefore, a comprehensive way to look at the cost is the total cost of ownership, which includes the development of the deployment platform and maintenance costs of running the cluster. Total cost of ownership, referred to as TCO, is a recommended way to compare the cost of serverless versus serverfull architectures. TCO is the sum of three cost components: infrastructure costs, which are the charges incurred from hosting application and operational workloads; development costs, which are the upfront charge of developing a deployment platform; and the maintenance costs of running the platform. Let us look at each of these components separately. Infrastructure costs are the major component of TCO, which is the cost to run the application. These costs in serverful architecture translate to the servers required for hosting the application and operational workloads like Kubernetes clusters. In serverless, these costs are incurred only for Lambda execution. For high traffic applications, the infrastructure costs can be more for serverless compared to serverful, as we can see in this case study for an application with 1.5 million transactions per day. Moving on to development costs. These costs are one-time upfront costs of developing the deployment platform. This includes capacity planning of the application load, deciding how many servers should be provisioned, and setting up Kubernetes clusters along with observability tooling. This cost is measured in terms of the number of days developers spend in capacity planning and Kubernetes cluster setup. There is also an implicit cost due to incorrect capacity planning, leading to under or over scaling of servers. As servers are not as dynamically scalable as serverless functions, when the servers are underscaled, it leads to customer dissatisfaction, and if they are overscaled, it leads to paying for extra servers. In serverless, there is very less capacity planning and infrastructure setup. So developers spend relatively much less time in planning deployment architecture. So development costs turn out to be relatively less in serverless. Coming to the last component of TCO, maintenance costs are the cost of supporting the application and operational workloads. These include Kubernetes cluster maintenance, patching and OS updates, and periodic security upgrades like hardening of AMI. Serverful architectures need much greater effort in maintenance, while serverless needs very minimal maintenance due to the fact that serverless services like AWS Lambda and Kinesis are fully managed by cloud providers. So considering the total cost of ownership, for high traffic application, though infrastructure costs are higher for serverless, the total cost of ownership would come to be less for serverless than in EC2, considering the maintenance costs and developer costs. As we can see, the maintenance costs in serverful architecture could far outweigh the maintenance costs in serverless, leading to this difference. This is one important point to consider while choosing the right model. I'm going to hand it over to Ashish now for the rest of the talk.
Thanks, Sridevi. Let's talk about serverless challenges. I think we have seen the rise of serverless, the demo, how it differs with Kubernetes, and we're going to talk about serverless challenges now. The first and foremost challenge is standardization. You can also call it as vendor lock-in. There's no CNCF backed serverless code base the way we have for Kubernetes. And due to the same reason, each cloud provider has their own implementation and slightly different features. For example, I would say the execution time. The function has time-bound execution time, and it differs. Azure Premium function has 30 minutes, AWS has 15 minutes, and GCP has 9 minutes of maximum execution time. There are few bells and whistles from each of the cloud provider, but more or less, I would say they have common features. Cold start, I think we have talked about it and how the cloud provider have solved it. Execution time, yeah, I think this is again a time bound. So any of the long running or batch processing kind of use cases will not work seamlessly with serverless. But any of the transactional APIs, I think the time is good enough for them to get executed. Limited support of runtime and languages, that is true. And again, the cloud provider is working towards it. They have the great minds and they're gonna keep on adding support and the languages. To say an example, Go is not supported in Azure functions right now, but you don't know. I mean, it's gonna be at some point of time. Security, oops, and there's a common misconception, I would say. As the servers are abstracted, it always feels that cloud provider can run any of the competitor code, or there's no multi-tenancy on the same server. But yeah, I mean, they have come up with the solutions for the same. These days, cloud providers suppose dedicated plan where you can run your workload only on the dedicated server, which is tagged for you, but definitely you need to pay more for it. Yeah, the next one is, I think, not always cost effective. Yeah, we have seen that in the earlier case where the person landed on the airport and he wanted to go to the conference. Assume the things have changed now and he wanted to go for a vacation for the next 30 days and he's going to be traveling all the states, places across the country. He's a travel freak. Maybe Uber don't work in that case. It's going to be more expensive. He needs to go with a server full, dedicated reserve resources. The rental car could be a right choice. But again, as Sridevi mentioned her earlier TCO slide, we not only need to consider the cloud bills, what you get, but also the TCO, maintenance cost, and the development cost. So consider all this. I think you need to justify and you need to take a right call. Let's move on to serverless patterns. This is one of the pattern. We won't go in detail of it in the interest of time. But the fundamental thing what we wanted to talk about here is the serverless functions are great choice when you have faster time to market, you want to minimize the upfront investment, you can get started with it. But at some point of time, if you think your load is getting much predictable, you're getting high traffic volume, if you want to change the deployment model, you should structure your code in such a way it's easy for you to move across the deployment model. So business logic, the application code consists of business logic and the platform specific code, which is function, Lambda, or a GCP specific code. Make sure your business logic, which normally comprises of 95 to 98% of your code, they are modularized, they are separated out. The platform specific code is in another module, I would say, and the ops CI/CD. So if you want to change the environment behind the scenes, the refactoring should take minimum effort. Again, this is kind of an evolutionary architecture. You start with serverless, you're good. If you want to move to any other deployment model, you should be able to seamlessly switch. This is on the similar line. I think we talked about business logic needs to be totally independent of the deployment code, related code, and same goes with the test code, what you have built it. Let's talk about key takeaways. I think we are at the end of the talk. This is going to be the last slide for you. Let me quickly go through it. Containers are great for predictable workload, heavy traffic, high compute intensive, and a long batch running application for sure. They have proven, and we should leverage all the cloud provider managed service like AKS, EKS to reduce the operational overhead. Serverless, on the other side, it's a mindset. It's a mindset of owning less and building more. Serverless offer faster time to market, high elasticity, availability, and a low entry cost. Most of the organizations, startups get started with it. They want to focus on solving customer use cases right away. I think we would also recommend, as said earlier, to modularize your code pattern so that deployment model is flexible and can easily be switched or changed. One of the AWS serverless hero, I believe it was Forrest, he said once, we should look for an opportunity to trade dollars against the engineering time spent on the operation. I think it's worth at some point of time. Hence said, containers are great packaging abstraction for the past, but serverless is reimagine the future. And definitely first step towards the no ops. Thanks for attending this, and feel free to reach out to me or Sridevi on our Twitter handle. Thank you.
Thank you.